Thanks for joining us for this episode. And I wanted to remind you that you actually can watch video versions of each episode by subscribing to the Church Advance YouTube channel. All you got to do is head over to youtube.com/@churchadvance or see the link in the show notes, and you can subscribe to our YouTube channel there. Of course, you can follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you may be listening to podcasts, but wanted to give a special plug for the video version. Well, I'm really excited about getting to today's episode as we continue to advance a reformation, a fellowship, partnership, and gospel hope amongst Bible-believing pastors and churches. This is Church Advance with Bryan Sams. Yeah, and I can imagine the 10 weeks on, 4 week off approach you're talking about there. Also, in the worst case scenario, if a group, goes off the rails, like we were talking about earlier, theologically or something like that. Well, now you can, obviously you're going to do your best and you're most likely going to address it in the moment. But if you get some feedback after the fact, you're like, okay, we're going to kill that group. Again, that seems like a worst case scenario matter, but again, I think that model allows, like you said, so many to on ramp and off ramp and things like that. So,
and I think, yeah. And one more thing, man. Hey guys, what do we think here? Do you think everybody that goes to your church is just nicely boxed up and tied off with a bow? Hey, listen, man, what's wrong with somebody saying something? Hey, it gives you a chance. Need to know, need to grow. Hey,
exactly.
Pull somebody aside and say, hey, man, just so you know, that's pretty off there. Let's talk about that. You got some time to meet this week? Or, hey, pastor would love to answer some of your questions about that. That's great, man. What's wrong with that? If you're really reaching people, good night. I've heard people say the craziest things in front of me. And you know what? I love it because it's kind of like saying, if I don't smell cigarette smoke at church, there's a problem. I want some crazy people at church.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think the same thing's true in groups. Well, okay. Do you want them to flesh that out there? Is everybody okay? Like, can you handle if somebody says something or believes something a little different than you? I think it's actually healthy. Not that we don't have a lot of that, but I shouldn't be afraid of that either. And I think that's important. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. Well, now I know I took us down a little bit of a rabbit hole there. Again, not scripted for us to discuss that. But again, those are just the questions that I've had this discussion with people about small group, that approach versus, like you said, more of a classroom based approach. And these are the questions that I get. And so I think you answered them excellently. It really removed, if you do it right, it sounds like, things are going to work out. So let's get into, kind of some of the main discussion from as far as what we're going to cover and talk about this idea of, why you switched and your philosophy. And point number one here, you simply state that this is the discipleship model.
Yes. Yeah. So our discipleship model at our church is we are here to make disciples and be disciples. And the way that we measure discipleship is giving, serving, and connecting. We're not saying if you're doing all those things, you are a disciple. What we're saying is for our church to help you become a disciple, a follower, the best way for us to do that is to help you learn how to give, how to serve, and how to grow and connect one with another. So groups is our measurement of growth and connection. In a group, you get to pray one another, you get to provide counseling, and you get to have community. Larry Osborne is the one who came up with the quote, most spiritual growth does not come as a set of a training program or curriculum. It comes as a result of life putting us in what he likes to call a need to know or need to grow situation. That's from the book Sticky Church, which is a great book about small groups. Highly recommend it. But then I love this other quote from the same book as it relates to discipleship. The purpose of a small group is to Velcro people to the two things they need most whenever they need to know or need to grow. Okay. Yeah. So if a person is a Christian and they need to know something and they need to grow in an area, what do they need more than anything? Two things. They need to be Velcroed to the Bible and they need to be Velcroed to other Christians.
Yeah.
And what better place to do that than a connection group? So that is our discipleship model. So let me back up. Let me backpedal a little bit. we're on a constant journey at our church of taking people from the first time they step into the door to becoming productive members of the church. We have a whole thing that we do, and maybe we should do a whole episode on that. But what is the measure? Like, what are we trying to get people to? Become members of the church who are connecting, giving, and serving. For us, that means you're a part of the team where you serve. You're a part of a connection group where you're growing, and you give financially to the ministry, so that you are expressing your love for Christ and helping the work of the gospel to go forward. That's the only way I know how to measure what the church is doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're pushing people to the group because we know that's where discipleship takes us. So when I say it's our discipleship model, like people have asked me the question, like we're moving the whole thing. We're moving everything to this. And I'm probably getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but ultimately, our end game is this where we're going to get nursery workers. This we're going to care for one another. This is how we're going to serve and raise funds and do, like, if we need to raise, I don't know, just anything. If we're needing to do something for a missionary, through the groups, through the groups.
Absolutely.
And so that's where discipleship is happening. So that's the first reason why we did it.
Yeah. And just to think about this for a moment, you talk about doing everything through those groups. Somebody said this to me one time, I can't remember who, but it was like, man, just a very simple paradigm shift makes you realize something. You say, okay, well, our church doesn't do small groups, connection groups. We do the classes, we do whatever. Think about this. Everything your church does, virtually everything outside of main worship, I guess you could technically include main worship, is a group. Everything. Your kids' classes, your nurseries, your even if you say, well, we just have a quarterly men's prayer breakfast. That's a group. That's a group of men getting together to pray.
Exactly.
And so everything is, and so, you say that, well, I can hear people maybe, again, pushing back on, well, we can't do that through our groups. You already are. You already have this model in place, whether you realize it or not, in one way or another. Now, whether you choose to shift back over, shift to the home groups and not, whatever, that's honestly indifferent. These groups are already there. And I think what you're talking about is not necessarily trying to compel people to maybe shift to meeting on a different day or switching from on-site to home groups as much as, no, we are trying to say, like, this is the way that this is the way that your church connects, because every church, unless you're just a small, church with 25 members, then you probably have some type of separate group, like, again, whether it be kids classes or whatever it may be. And so
it's scriptural. Yeah. It's scriptural too. I mean, in Acts, it says they met publicly and from house to house. You worship in public and you fellowship in private. It's a model. And I think, and for all my really strong IFB friends who listen to this podcast only because they're my friend, I'm sure, I would say this: it's the exact same thing that happened in IFB 50 years ago. They used Sunday school, and that was a different purpose. It was evangelism. And that's fine. Hey, listen, if you want to use your groups for evangelism, that's awesome. Whatever. But they used Sunday school to build their church. I mean, the fastest growing Sunday school is 1970s and all that.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
So they use groups to accomplish a goal.
Yep.
Great. We're just saying our groups have a purpose, and the purpose is not sit around and listen to Deacon Ned teach the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've been in churches where the Sunday school class, the only Sunday school class, is in the auditorium before the sermon.
Yeah.
So what's different? What's different between the sermon and the Sunday school class?
Yeah.
Nothing. Not a thing.
Yeah.
And
I was just saying, and that leads me to just, again, a kind of a spinoff question too. I just kind of used an example. Well, if you have a small church of 25, you might not need groups, but maybe I'm wrong on that. I mean, at what size does your church, you think, justify saying, no, you do need these groups? You need to be doing, even if you split into two, I don't know if there's a set number, but like, at what point?
I would like to,
because there's probably small churches out there listening.
I would like to think if you have more than 20 or 30 people, how can you really get to know one another? And not to mention, it's not just number, it's setting. So you come into 30 people in your church. Are you still getting the opportunity to really fellowship, really share prayer requests, really do that? Maybe not. So I think it's more than number, but I know me, like I know I can't get to know more than 10 or 15 people real well. And I think that's important. So, I mean, I would say if you got more than 15 people, you are certainly qualified for 2 groups at that point, and then go from there. But I think it's more about what you're doing than how big you are. And I think if you can't accomplish fellowship, breaking of bread, prayers, and ongoing encouragement, which is biblical, then you should consider a small group model.
Yeah. Well, we're already kind of talking about point number 2, which is this is your community model. We've been talking about this idea of like you're building community with each other and how to do that. So unless you've got more to say there about point 1, I think we should just keep diving into this idea of this community
here's the
model.
bottom line. Small groups are where relationships are built. Small groups are where honesty and transparency are. You can sit in a crowd of 200 people and listen to preaching, slip in and slip out. When you're sitting down with 15, maybe 20 people, and you're talking about the Bible and you're answering questions and you're sharing prayer requests and you're sharing what's going on in your life, that is where honesty and transparency are built. And that's where real relationships are forged. Guys, you can't build relationships in a crowd. I can build rapport with a crowd. I cannot build a relationship with a crowd. Yeah. I build relationships around a coffee cup. I build relationships on a phone call. We just had Dan Purdy here. How did me and Dan become such friends? Not at church, at the gym.
Yeah.
Okay. We established a friendship. Let me give you an example of that. We had a fishing trip with about 10 guys back in December of 2022. And I decided, I'm going to just ask some questions of these guys. I'm going to ask, what's the most challenging thing you faced in 2022? What's the most exciting thing that happened in 22? What's your biggest prayer request? Dude, man, it broke something loose. And I'm telling you, those guys that were there shared things. What a question to ask somebody.
Yeah.
What's the biggest challenge you faced in 2022?
Yeah. I mean, that's very super thought-provoking.
And man, I mean, we sat around dinner. We talked and talked and talked and talked, and then it led to back to the room we were staying in, and it kept going. And that's the kind of stuff where relationships are built. You ask that question to somebody, you're studying the book of the Bible, and one of the questions in the study guide is, what is a difficult thing you faced this summer, and how does this verse apply to it? And you start seeing somebody open up about a challenge, a prayer, a burden, and all of a sudden, boom, relationships are formed. And that's why this is such a beautiful model.
Yeah. And again, because, there is this idea that obviously the preaching of the Word of God, the teaching of the Word of God is paramount. It's a big, especially when it comes to the worship experience. But again, it goes back to kind of even biblically, like, what's the church all about? And that is this idea of really a community of people to come together and grow together in Christ, not to necessarily, and we could say that, yes, sitting down and listening to a sermon is a version of growing together because corporately you're hearing a sermon. But that to me is, especially nowadays in the digital age, I can in theory, because this is kind of what I do. I mean, I'm in some ways distantly connected to River City because I'm listening to the sermon every week, just about every week on podcast, your sermon. And, so I'm able to still get your teaching, but I'm not able because of, physical location to truly grow with your church. And so, just because somebody's sitting in the auditorium listening to a sermon each week and participating in worship, which is all great, it doesn't mean they're necessarily growing. Because this community, it builds connections, relationships, accountability, all of that stuff. And so,
yes.
Now the next item you have here, the next point is that, and we've already kind of touched on this a little bit, I think, this is your church's service tool.
Yeah. Let me give you one simple example of this, meaning we are now using our small groups to accomplish ministry related service. Okay. Man, I tell you guys, we've killed ourselves trying to administrate in detail every detail of everything that happens in our churches, and it's wearing us all out. Look, harness your people. Okay, I'm not talking about use your people. I'm talking about harness your people. Give them opportunities to use their God-given gifts. Simple example. Traditionally at River City, when we were running 100, 125 people, we created River City Cares. It was the food chain thing that happens when a woman has a baby. People sign up and provide meals for the family for 7 days or whatever it is. That's awesome. Praise the Lord.
Yeah.
But you can't do something like that in a church that has more than that. That's about the limit. So what do? you move it to the groups. A baby is born in the group. The group
Yes.
ministers to the baby. A baby shower is no longer, guys, how can you have a baby shower when your church has 500 people? How can you expect to engage the whole congregation in a baby shower? So what do? Baby showers are now groups.
Yep.
Now, you can invite more people, of course, but
Sure.
the group is the one that sponsors the baby shower. That's right. Somebody is in the hospital who is praying for the person, reaching out to the person. The group.
Yeah.
The group. So, example, right now, tonight, in fact, we're recording this on a Wednesday. We're getting ready to have our back to school bash, which is we give out backpacks and school supplies for kids in the community. We're expecting a blowout on Saturday. We realize we're short on school supplies. So what do? Tonight, every group leader is taking that Amazon wish list to the church and saying, man, guys, please, if you'll order something off this tonight, it'll get shipped directly to the church. It's groups. Yeah. Groups are buying pencils. Groups are buying paper. Groups are buying glue and hand sanitizer. So we just push everything out the groups. If we need to raise money for a missions event, do it in your group. And hey, groups can take missions trips. Groups can go participate in whatever, man. It's the service tool. Yeah. So we're no longer standing up there begging for people to go sign up in the foyer to do something. Yeah. The groups are leading the charge in service opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've heard some churches, say again, just this idea of, well, we want our church, even though we might be a mid-sized, larger church, we want to feel small. And so that's why we keep all this stuff, like I said, baby showers is a great example, pushing people to sign up to volunteer. But the truth is if you want your church to grow, and it's not all about numbers, and statistically, the likelihood of, you having a church of even, 300 plus people, just statistically is probably pretty unlikely. But even for a larger church, like, look, this is the opportunity by pushing people to groups to make your church still feel small, no matter how big it is.
That's exactly right.
If you look at any of the, most any of the mega church models out there, the reason that they are doing that, they've grown and that they are the size they are. Yeah, they might do, worship really, high-end production and, have the best video gear and all that stuff. But early on, they learned how to do groups really, really well and embrace this model, because no matter how big they grow, there will always be that smaller community of that group. And so the idea of people serving through that instead of, again, keeping it also corporately kind of controlled and announced is good. So the next point we have here is that, and we started to touch on this as well, that this is the front line for pastoral care.
Yeah, I call it decentralized pastoral care. I do some coaching with some friends, and some of them are in more rural settings, smaller churches that are growing, and they're trying to figure out how to change their mindset. Yeah. And I'm always talking about decentralizing pastoral care. Who needs to be the one praying with the person at the hospital? Who needs to be the one writing the cards? Who needs to be the one just generally praying for the people? Of course, I try to pray for everybody in my church every week, generally speaking. And if I have a specific request, I will. But if I'm the only person in my church caring for other people, it's going to be weak. But man, by the time I find out somebody's in the hospital, it's already been cared for 10 times over. Yeah. Decentralizing pastoral care means, I think the weakness of so many churches in the past has been pastoral care being defined as, this is what the pastor does. He goes to all the hospitals. He prays for all the sick people. He does this. No. I think it's that the pastor leads the church to see that it gets done. Yeah. I mean, what about where do spiritual gifts play into all this? I mean, if you were to look at my spiritual gifts, I'm telling you, man, I am weak in that stuff. I'm not, mercy is not in my top 5. You're not.
Shocker, man. I thought you were Mr. Grace over here.
I'm not the guy you want me sitting at your hospital bed for 30 minutes with you. Now I'll go. I've done it many times over, but I've got a guy on my team. He's a retired guy. He's Captain Empathy. He's the best guy. He's the guy you want there. Yeah. It's not that I do it. It's that I see that it gets done, and groups is the front line. And I think you guys, you want to save yourself some time. And not only that, it sounds selfish, but it's not. You are releasing people to significant ministry opportunities by giving away pastoral care through groups.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you kind of said this earlier too, really how realistically you think about, especially, kind of the older you get, you kind of find this Some people more social, outgoing, extroverted than others, but really think about the people closest to you. What is your capacity of really being able, just as a person, not as a pastor, being able to actually have true, authentic relationships? How many people? I think the number you throw out there was 10 to 15 people that you could truly consider to be close friends, people that you want to like check in on, have conversations with regularly. And so really now taking that and amplifying it and saying, well, now pastorally, I'm going to really realistically, can you take care pastorally of more than that many people? In reality, no, probably not. And so, I like that, decentralizing the pastoral care through the groups is fantastic. The next thing is that this number 5, this is your church's best source of growth and retention. Hey, thanks so much for joining us for this episode. And until next time, I want to remind you that you can subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can actually watch video versions of each episode. The video version is also available on Spotify, so make sure to follow us there. You can also catch the audio on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and wherever you may listen to podcasts. If you want to connect with Bryan, then simply head over to his website, bryansams.com, where you can reach out, ask a question, and get connected there. The podcast is hosted by Bryan Sams. It's co-hosted and produced by myself, Luke Clayton, and the team at mustincrease.com. Thanks so much again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode as we continue to advance a reformation, a fellowship, partnership, and gospel hope amongst Bible-believing pastors and churches right here, Church Advance with Bryan Sams.